How far into the story are you?
I'm on episode 3. I know that's quite far behind. Is it 11 whole main story episodes? They're all like 45 minutes to listen to each.
Yeah, one of them's an hour.
Oh my god.
Yeah. So I say, like, mate, start reading.
Mate,
Each episode is like half a regular magic story.
Were we wrong wanting
No,
magic story?
We got exactly what we asked for. Okay? And I'm not complaining. I'm just looking at it and going, it's a big old... It's like when you ask for, like, oh, I'm going to do an all-you-eat buffet, and then you sit down and you go, it's a lot of food.
Oh, it's the Homer Simpson eating all the donuts in hell.
It's a lot of fucking food. I mean, I'm not going to put the fork down, but it's a lot of food.
All right, let's jump into it then.
Yeah.
Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things magic, flavour design, and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And we're in space!
Yeah, and it's a gay old time, because it's Pride as well today.
Oh, it is Pride. It's London Pride today.
Yeah, Pride across the multiverse.
Beyond
the multiverse.
Pride across the multiverse, was actually a secret.
That was the origin... No, that was the one with the Mystic Confluence. Mystic Confluence? The land that taps the pay life and taps for any colour.
And all the bears in the sauna.
Yeah, and it's got Triumphant Reckoning, it's Nico, and then you've also got Collective Voyage, and it's got Girlfriends on it.
Yeah.
And I think I can't remember the other ones, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'll say for the moment, there was the wedding of Raoul's Eric and Tomic, thank you. Yeah, they're lovely, delightful wedding. So yeah, cool.
We're talking about Edge of Eternities. So we're doing a world building episode, like an old school world building episode for us, because it's not the multiverse anymore. We're beyond the multiverse, which is like a fundamental shift. Like I was talking to you the other day about it, and it's kind of akin to when Dominaria was the central point of all Magic story, and for all intents and purposes was just the setting of Magic. And then obviously the multiverse became when they were like, oh, okay, we're going to do these different, these worlds. And now this is like the next step.
Yeah,
this is
it used to be that an upside down mountain with smart goblins used to be this far out crazy idea. Yeah. And now it's like, no.
Because they weren't really... That's my laptop making sound like it's about to take off as well. It's a big old jump, which they didn't really signpost. Like, I suppose if you were much smarter, you would have maybe thought, oh yeah, they're definitely going to do this thing where it's no longer the multiverse. But even when they started doing, like, the Coin Empire and starting to hint that the Fomori was somehow bigger than the multiverse, I kind of still felt like maybe Edge of Eternities was going to be all those kind of planes that were, like, on the far reaches of things, right? Like Equilor.
Yeah, the precedent set, right, is that every Magic setting is within its own plane bubble, whether that bubble be like a flat plane like, say, Innistrad, or being, an artificial plane that's made, which, now I think about it, the power it must take to, like, create a plane within the Blind Eternities that can then, not be devoured by the Blind Eternities is pretty fucking strong.
Yeah.
But even, like, even in terms of, like, trying to fit space within the multiverse, or even the idea of these spaceships that the Fomori had, because are they then able to, like, travel like the weatherlight between different planes through the Blind Eternities? And it was for us, I think it was this big thing of like, well, we know that there's stars and there's planets and stuff, and obviously the question for me would be, where the fuck does Unfinity take place? And obviously there was Balovia. Is it Balovia that Unstable took place in? Babelovia. So. Yeah. I don't think we ever did a proper deep dive into, and we probably should have done a little look at it, considering this is, maybe similar context, but it could have been like the Saturday morning television show of the Edge of Eternities, And so, because there is Space Bellerin canonically out there somewhere, or was out there somewhere, and maybe when we get to the story thing, we might end up getting some closure on that, who knows. But yes, it was always a thing of, how do we make something that's bigger than the multiverse fit within the multiverse? And they just said, oh, we're not. It is literally...
It's on the outside of things.
It's the outside of the Eternities.
So if we think about the setting, so we're going to talk about today about the setting, what the kind of ramifications of the setting are, what the implications are, and then maybe about some of the races that we find in this setting and the kind of different factions that go on, because obviously it's still Magic the Gathering, they still have to kind of make it factional, and then just basically how it all fits within the world of the multiverse and Magic in general. But if we talk about how it's set up then, so the Vorthos cast did an episode on this as well, and it's so funny because I was listening to Crystalano on the Vorthos cast, and the way he was describing it was exactly how, before he was saying everything, it was going like, oh, well, I often think of it like a donut. And then he would go, I think of it like a donut. I had to draw it out. And I was like, I had to draw it out. And I think they've done a really good job of describing it in a way that's making people discover it for themselves. Because if you read the Planeswalker's Guide, which is this huge document written by Miguel Lopez, who's the creative lead on this, Jay Anelli, who's obviously the lore master for Magic, and he had a big input in this set, Laurel Pratt and Amanda LaFranco. Like, this is one of the biggest Planeswalker's Guides we've had for a while, and we've had some big ones.
Well, the way I look at it is, this isn't Magic the Gathering, right? This is Science the Gathering.
But
because as much as it's within the realm, and obviously everything is within the context of Magic the Gathering as a system and as a wider world outside of the multiverse, but like, this isn't. It even starts the Planeswalker Guide by going, right, so there's protons, there's neutrons, there's ether.
Yeah.
You know,
well,
they line up they separate it out. But it's the Thor thing, right? It's saying magic and science can be imperceivable from each other.
So the line is in the Planeswalker's Guide: the common agreement assumes that all socients agree that it's very dense, kind of like lore mastery language, which I actually quite like. That the basic matter of reality is a concert of particles and substrates, and the substrates being ether, mana, photons, quarks, and so on. And what we'll notice as we talk about this, and as we talk about the set in general, is that it's sci-fi, nerdy sci-fi made by sci-fi nerds. Because, so I'm a big Star Trek fan. Mm-hmm. We're both big Star Wars fans. Mm-hmm. And Star Wars is definitely on the sci-fi fantasy side of things, with, like, you know, the kind of religiosity of the Force and whatever else. They have, like, witches and things. Mm-hmm. And then whilst Star Trek absolutely deals with things like religion and whatever, it often tries to really funnel it through the kind of sciencey aspect, even if the science is like sci-fi science, right?
Yeah.
And what they're doing here is they're really throwing it down the middle, because what Star Trek does is it will try and think about logical, scientific ways to get out of a situation where the characters use their like expertise and knowledge to basically do magic, whereas Star Wars will go, he is magical, it's the will of this force that we can't explain. So when they do things here, they have their cake and eat it in a really interesting way, because they still say things like, yeah, no, it's space, and there's no matter and photons and quarks, and it's a very hard magic versus soft magic system. It's very like, no, things have rules, but we're also throwing in the idea that there's these magical elements like ether and mana, which, although they exist in some degree in our reality, they're talking about it like the ether from Kaladesh, like the mana from ley lines. Yeah. You know, they're really like merging the two ideas in a really cool way. I like that. I mean, because the basic principle, right, is that because we're outside of the blind eternities, ley line magic and stuff like that isn't really a thing out here. Like they call it ejecta, right? All of the little bits and pieces of the multiverse that have kind of shed. Yeah. Sorry, it's pokey. God, good rum and coke that. So it's kind of like shedding all of this matter, similar to like how and this is why I really find interesting about the setting, is obviously it's very much closer to home in terms of we look up in the stars and that's space. You know, we don't see blind eternities like our planet is in a plane. So it's a little bit more easy to relate to the physics of this, even if it is complete futuristic, not a bullshit, don't think about it too much. But the idea that there isn't magic per se around in this area, and they're still having to like find and I think one of the things that's cool about the Planeswalker Guide is that you get notations from Tezzeret. Yeah.
When we first read it, I was like, this should be in every Planeswalker Guide. Whoever's the POV Planeswalker for that plane should be going through the Planeswalker Guide with annotations and going, oh, I didn't expect that, like Raoul doing that, and it makes them the literal insert for the player, which is what their role is anyway. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then it kind of plays off that conceit a little bit better, that, you know, we are Planeswalkers and we're just like, you know, jumping about the multiverse ourselves. This idea that everything's had to develop and advance in its own like thousands upon thousands of years out here because they haven't got. It's almost like imagine if that's what life was here, where there is this blind eternities pocket out there, and we just happen to live in the ejector of this cool, interesting, magical multiverse, and we're just out here just being normies, you know, without bricks and mortar.
So So just to lay it out then, in terms of people are struggling to picture like where this Eternities, and this edge of Eternities is. If you imagine us like a sphere of existence, and inside that sphere of existence is the multiverse.
Think of it like an orange.
Like an orange. So the central orange, the juicy goodness, is the multiverse, and that's the multiverse we've been in for the entire time we've been in Magic. And you've got all the different planes in there, and the blind eternities, and there's the kind of matter between them, and that's the rules that exist therein. If you then take the pith of the orange, which is kind of like it's sort of the matter of the orange, but it's not really like you can't really eat it, and it's just kind of there, and it's the substrate. That is the edge of Eternities. So they're kind of outside this central sphere of like existence.
Yeah, it's almost like the pill, right?
Yeah, and then the outer layer of the orange, the kind of the skin of the orange, which is just completely like you wouldn't necessarily use it for anything. I guess in this analogy, is like the sort of dead existence that's even outside of the edge of Eternities. And if you're traveling around this kind of outer ring, this edge of Eternities, and on the inside of your sort of perception of existence is a reddish hue, because obviously they're playing with the idea that we're in space. Mm-hmm. And there was did you ever read an article? It was kind of a big thing a few years ago, pre-COVID, when they kind of officially made the color of space beige. Do you ever hear that?
God, I do remember.
Like when you zoom out of all images of like from space, if you were to like look at it objectively, they think everything collectively would give the universe a beige hue.
Shockingly, everything just turns to brown.
Yeah. But obviously, there's like nebula and whatever else in space. So space has like different colors depending on like the matter that's within it. So the inner layer of looking into the multiversal sphere, if you like, if you're in the edge of Eternity, I keep trying to say the blind Eternities, is a red wall called the Chaos Wall. Yeah. And if you are in the edge of Eternities, you have no concept of what's on the inside, because it's this thick, chaotic thing. A little bit like the warp from Warhammer 40k. It's very impenetrable, and they think there's a line in the Planeswalkers Guide that talks about the myths and legends of what could be inside this area, because they do kind of have an idea that there is some sort of existence on the inside of this chaos wall, is like demons, and it's like something hellish and chaotic. So it's this idea that, and what they're obviously seeing is the kind of language of all these different multiverses, which if you were to see it all at once in this substrate, must look like hell.
I mean, I guess there are some images of the blind Eternities, right? But like it's all very interpretation, like I can't imagine I imagine you can't take a picture of it very easily.
No. And then if you imagine on the other side of that existence, where you're the other side of this orange pith looking out to like the orange skin, if you like, this analogy is getting away from me, where there's nothing beyond that, and that is just the dead end of what is reality, or at least as far as they consider it and we consider it at this point, then you have a blue-hued wall called the Quiet Wall.
Because the idea is that certain light is moving towards you, certain light is moving away from you. It's the wave. It's a conceit on wavelength.
Yeah, the blue Quiet Wall, everything's moving out, because it's like that is literally dead space. Whereas the Chaos Wall is like things are trying to like are bucking up against the side of it, which are the expansion of the multiverse. And so what we have then is this kind of what they keep calling it this annular universe, which doesn't mean yearly. It means like almost like ring. Yeah. So it's kind of you are traveling around a central thing that they're not quite sure of.
Yeah, and they can't. And it's almost like our perspective from Tezzeret is that he can't travel back easily enough, because it's almost like a wall of like resistance, right? There's a reason why it's almost like it's like the edge of a pond, right? Yeah. Like there's got to be an edge so the fish don't keep swimming past, like an aquarium, I guess, almost. And there is going to be that glass, but that glass works both ways, of where Tezzeret now can't permeate back in. I guess it begs the question of how the fuck did he get out?
Well, this is the interesting thing. This is where you start to get some really cool ideas, and why a lot of people are kind of seeing this as Wizards of the Coast going, look, we know that space doesn't really work within the context of the multiverse, because we've already established many times that aside from a moon or a sun here and there, each plane, unless its whole gimmick is that it's a celestial plane, is its own thing. It's its own object within the matter of the
let's
not
get into the complications of how constellations work on Theros, even if there is Nyx, because how would you get the distance?
But then the Nyx, but then that is the magical energy of that plane, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's just an image, right? So is every sky just a projected image like the Truman Show?
Well, there we are. So they're basically what people are sort of going is that they've made this kind of clever magic trick where they've kind of gone this kind of annular ring around the central sphere of the multiverse. When we talk about this ejector, is like these concepts and maybe like a sort of like, you know, a biome or a species here, or like, you know, an individual is kind of somehow, this is what we'll figure out how this happens when we explore it more often, has made its way to this annular space on the outside of the multiverse, and has then developed over billions of years, or like years as it's understood in the multiverse, to just do its own thing. So it's kind of like this weird sub-reality that is related directly to what's going on in the multiverse, but it's its own thing.
It's
wild.
It's the perspective that we have of the multiverse, but within the magic. I guess you can't even call it. I guess it is still a multiverse because it's still out. Even though it's outside
it's a multiverse of the multiverse.
Yeah, because I guess it's outside of the Eternities, but it's still within that universe, right?
Well, I think it's more like if you had a bunch of Lego sets. Like where everyone always buys individual Lego sets, but then eventually, because of just playing with it, whatever, you end up putting them all in the same big Lego box. And then the pieces that you kind of dump out after that, or you kind of take bits and bobs of, they still look like a piece of the Millennium Falcon or just a red brick or whatever else. Context. But they're out of context, and then they become their own thing. That's what we're dealing with here. Because and there's still different solar systems within this place. Well, yeah,
so we obviously sit within the Cythera system, which is about 6 or 7 planets. I can't remember exactly how many, but about 6 planets, and a couple of other like not planet but notable things like the Wormwall and the Garden of Apiron.
Yeah.
So we're already seeing like a little system. Like we don't know how big that system is contextually in the ring, in the donut ring. So we don't actually know how big and how wide spanning this is. And I don't think they're ever going to give us like a, because they could potentially.
They would tie themselves up in knots.
Imagine they could map the size of the multiverse within, right? If you went all the way around. But then the question then is, can they also then go over? Is it not just a donut, but it's like spherical?
Oh well, that's interesting. I think in my mind I've always imagined it a bit more like a rubber ring around.
But then that's why we don't get into it, because then in space, why can't I just go up? You know?
Yeah, I suppose.
I kind of just go up and over. So that's why I kind of think of it as like if you 3D that donut, I think it makes a little bit more sense, because up and down and even as they say in the story, down is backwards and up is forwards.
Yeah.
You know, like it really, like we'll get into when we get into the actual like stories, like the minutiae of some of the fucking mental shit that Seth has written into this story. It's crazy. But we're still looking at the grander,
at the wider things. Yeah.
So so we know kind of what we're looking at. What have we got within what we're looking at?
So we're in the Cythera system, and the Cythera system is called so because of the central star of the system, Cythera. Cythera is a dying or dead star, which is or was happily sitting at kind of supernova status. So if we imagine it in our real world context, it was essentially a star that is dying and was at some point going to explode. However, it is currently becoming a supervoid, which is, and this is again where I talk about the blending of fantasy versus hard science to make a hard magic system. It is not going into a black hole, because that is what we would in our real world think of things when a star collapses on itself. It is becoming a super void, which is the reason they've chosen that language is kind of is like the absence of magic or matter.
Yeah, it's essentially the same thing, but a little less, oh my god, scary, dangerous, destructive.
Yes.
And I say that as if it isn't also still pulling everything in a high mass thing. And then also just come back quickly to Cythera being a dying star. So in the grand scheme of things, Cythera is quite young. I'd say you could imagine it the same kind of age as our own sun, of where it's kind of in its early adolescence. You know, it's got a long way to go. But then what happened is it passed through, or a cloud of ether, shall we say, like a big old wibbly wobbly energy thingy passed by, or it passed by, and it went num num. I'm going to eat all of that up, num num, and it got so full that it went, oh shit, okay, I've got too massive. And then what happens to stars when they get too massive? They start to inward.
Yeah.
And then the monoists, basically chucked a it's not the singularity, is it? But they essentially have this thing that they can chuck into the middle of the thing that goes, cool, we're just going to accelerate that quickly, and we're going to make you go zoom.
Yeah, so let's talk about the factions then. So let's start with the monoists. So there are two, obviously this is all as we know it now, like most planes, when we go to visit them, they always kind of sort of do the top line factions. And then we learn about more and more as we go. So there are multiple factions in this setting, as ever. Some of them are very specific to the Cythera system, and some of them are ones that it's kind of implied are across more of the edge of Eternities. The edge being the colloquial name for space. They do also use the word space. So if we use the word space, that's also fine. So the Monoists are one of the two major religiosity factions. And they're the black faction. So Monoism and the Monsteriat, reading from the Planeswalker's Guide. To quote the notation from Tezzeret on this faction, so just give us a bit of context, they are essentially an entropic death cult, which is not a new concept to Magic. It's not a new concept to much of sci-fi. And what they want, they are basically trying to create, is it 1,000? Or
so Thera is their 1,000th super void that they've essentially cultivated.
Yes.
Because this all accelerates the universe towards its eventual and unavoidable conclusion, which then is Inevita.
Inevita, which is basically the entropic death of the universe.
It's the next life, essentially.
Yeah, and they're basically trying to bring forth some sort of celestial ancient called the Immortal Faller, which is their god and savior. It's also like the first prophet as well of their religion. It's always he, him, and it's always capitalized. And basically they are trying to bring around the entropic death of the universe.
The end of the world. Because they hear from beyond the voids. And this is something that is like genuinely documented to the point of where it's been written down as teachings. They hear something from the other side. So for them, there isn't just death beyond there. There is another life. There is something beyond. And that's what they should be aiming towards, because that brings them to their next, level of existence, where they believe in reincarnation or if they believe in immortalization, whichever kind of aspect that they think it might happen. Beyond the void, there is something for them to push towards. And because it's all going to happen anyway, why not get there faster?
They are in diametric opposition to the other largest faith-based faction, which are the Celestial Palantate, or Paltanate, who have different sort of factions within them. The Sunstar Free Company, which is like their sort of militaristic arm. And their religion is Sumism. So if you have Monoism and Sumism,
that's really into maths, mate.
Well, this is it, where they kind of sprinkle in these kind of like physics and maths and sciences, kind of like in these religions, and they are the white faction. So if you think of Monoists as looking very much like the Cabal with their black robes and sort of like heavy helmets and things, the Sumists and
like Benalian
basically, and they are much more about sort of bringing. So it's light versus dark. So their whole thing is about the great calculation and about how the sum of everything, as opposed to the reduction of everything, creates the best world for all. Unfortunately, this does mean there's in the second story, I think, there's a good line by the protagonists where they talk about how the Sumists and their military arms often kill anyone they meet, because mathematically anyone who's not part of their religion is potentially against their religion, and so it's mathematically more logical to kill people who aren't part of your religion to bring about the religion for everyone, even if that's not likely.
By the way, until you get to like episode
yeah, they do go into it.
Oh my lord.
And so, but within the Sumist religion, we also find our space angels as well.
The Asteria or something like
that? Yeah. So the space angels are the Astelli.
The Astelli, there we go.
And so the Astelli are the living remains of stars consumed by supervoids. So we're literally talking about angels created by the mana.
Quantum beings that have a greater understanding of future and past and stuff, and they take a human form, I guess, which bonkers.
So basically what we have here is it's called the Entropy War between the two religious factions. So we have a death cult that turns stars into supervoids, and a quote-unquote life cult that, using the energy created by the supervoids, looks to reinvigorate the universe using the angels that is created by the supervoids.
So they've got a machine that you essentially fire a laser at a big-ass body, like a star or something. The acceleration of that around the star jets it back into its own engine with increased energy, and it just keeps slingshotting it until it's got enough power to send a fucking javelin into a supervoid to reignite it and bring it back to supernova, which would, by the way, eradicate everything in the system, because a supernova isn't really very good for life in close quarters, even if it's better for the sum overall in a long time. And this is where the wrinkle is, because as much as I don't want to be like death cult, I'm like, there is something a little less, because their big thing is choice as well. Is really really important, and it's choice versus non-choice, because for the Sumists, your choice probably doesn't matter, as opposed to just looking towards the
mathematically.
Great sum. Yeah, just do the math, mate, and that'll give you the answer. I don't want you to show you're working. Just give me the answer the calculator gave me. Whereas the monoliths are very much about, you can never stop someone's free will. If someone wants to do something, you can't challenge it. You let them do what they want to do, because that's the way it should be. And it's almost...
And the only certainty is that everything will end.
Yes, exactly. And so it's kind of like, it's funny because they've both got such surety about things, but because of what their stance is, they push further and further away against each other, which is something else we'll look at when we get to the story episode next time.
I mean, we're breezing over these quite huge concepts that... What I've really appreciated about this setting, maybe more than any other, there's often a criticism that we have about a lot of planes where we feel like they obviously have, the world building and narrative teams have this concept for, we could probably do a whole game based on Journey to the Centre of the Earth, but we have 360 cars to fit it into. This is not only them doing a new setting, it's like they're doing a new rule for magic.
It's like adding when they added Lord of the Rings Warhammer. It's like it's the same game, but it's a whole different thing.
It's a whole different.
And this could have essentially had slightly different rules, and it wouldn't. I'm glad they haven't, but we could keep coming back to the Edge of Eternities over and over and over again.
Yeah,
and you could do. And I guess at that point people would ask, well, what's the difference between just going to a plane? It's like, well, that's the point. There might be certain planes that don't work within the multiverse. There might be some settings that work a lot better as a random planet out in the Edge of Eternities.
Exactly, yeah.
So it kind of gives them now an option to go, do we go back to, do we have a high fantasy setting, or do we have a sci-fi fantasy setting?
So we have our two Star Warsy religions.
The white and the black.
Yeah.
Right, let's look at the blue.
Let's look at our Star Trek.
Is that the blue?
Well, I'm talking about Pinnacle.
Oh, okay, right, yeah, sure. So the actual, like, how the hell did all of these different systems all come into contact with each other? How are they all travelling around? How does any of this make sense? Is there some structure?
Yeah,
there is.
Is Pinnacle. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, this is the Federation.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of Star Wars, this is the Republic. If you're a fan of Mass Effect, which this feels, having never played a Mass Effect.
True, it does have Mass Effect
This
vibes.
is a very Mass Effect-y kind of setting.
Even with like the big, what's the Reapers or whatever that happened, there's this big kind of overarching, because we'll get to the big bad later, but there is this overarching threat thing that still sits there that's very much spooky wooky.
Yeah. I actually don't know what the kind of united species of whatever is in Mass Effect, but people will tell me what that is, and that's what this is. They even have like a little badge, like a little 3-pronged badge that might as well just be the Federation.
That's just the Star Trek.
It's just Star Trek, which I love. I really love it. So Pinnacle is this united Federation of planets that basically what they're trying to do is add sort of order and structure. And very much feels like sort of space navy, sort of like, politics. There's no currency. I mean, again, I literally am just talking about fucking the Federation.
Yeah, there is no Malomass is.
So they call it Malomass.
Yes,
and Malomass is the idea of like your worth and your sort of reputation, but also what you're bringing to the table.
It's kudos, essentially.
Is kudos. So that might be something very literal, like, yes, you have a freighter full of, like, ore, so you're bringing that to the table, and they're going, cool, you've provided all this ore and material, so that's a lot of mallow mass. Yeah. So we can give you room and board and fix your ship.
So it's not only that it's not only that you have it, and it might be worth something, and other people might want to trade for it, because there are certain systems that still do generic currency transference, which I think is great. They're very good at going... Just because something is true generally, because the edge is so large, that means there's likely to be varying different opinions about this.
Now, I loathe to keep bringing it back to Star Trek, but the Ferengi still deal in gold press latinum within the Star Trek universe, and there's often discourse of how like the Federation deals with that because they don't have their own currency.
Yeah, I think it's a massive thing to say, like, if a certain planet is rich and it's very one specific thing, there's no way that all of the malamass of that planet is going to be around the procurement of that particular thing and that trade of that thing. What I was saying is, like, so it's not just that I've got the metal, but also the fact that I was one to go and bring it to you. Yeah. Every aspect of goodwill essentially gets weighed against you,
and that is recorded. It could also be something like you saved a Pinnacle ship from being sucked into a super void, and so you've been given mallow mass of like good deeds or of like being sort of like a savior of sorts. That gets put against your record, and therefore you can go and sleep in a swanky suite in the nearest starbase and things like that.
And it does generally hold everyone in good renown with each other, because breaking mallow mass is obviously... Killing that one person over there is bad for that person over there, sure, but it also impacts your mana mass for the rest of the universe as well. So you kind of want to make sure you don't do anything too bad, otherwise it might fuck you over for everything else.
Yeah, it's the system of honour of being a host. If you have a ship in danger coming towards your space station, you are honour bound to host them as far as their Malamass can take them, but you're also not to turn them away, because if you then go on to go somewhere else and people go, well, they turned away that spaceship, we're not, like, you don't have any sort of clout here. It's an interesting way to basically say everyone will help each other as long as everyone helps each other.
Yeah.
But obviously there's conflict within.
So where did this concept of Malamass come from? Is there a specific race? I mean, how are we also getting around this multiverse? Really? I mean, surely, because without magic, without planeswalkers, it takes a lot of fucking technological expertise to fire yourself around the galaxy.
Well, aside from your humans, who are literally fucking everywhere, you have different species, and they are very alien-y. Some of them will look more familiar, and some of them won't. The big one, the one which I guess is it will become the most interesting in terms of how it affects the rest of the multiverse, are the Drix.
Yes.
Who, I mean, they're going to be blue-green, right?
Yeah, I don't even know. No, because the only one we've seen so far has been Mono Black. So I think
interesting.
I don't know.
They might be multicolored.
They might be multicolored, yeah.
Yeah, so the Drix are essentially ancient species within the Edge of Eternities.
I like to think of them as, without us knowing what a Jedi is, what an average person on a random planet in Star Wars, that's what they look at a Jedi like. Oh my god, this crazy space wizard thing that can do things that no one else can.
They're Yodas. They're a bunch of Yodas.
Yeah. They've got kind of lightsabery kind of things.
They do a little bit.
They're riff rippers or whatever they're called.
So they are a species who have perfected the faster than light travel, which they call weft walking.
Weft walking.
So weft walking, and basically they don't shy away from the idea of going, look, we even call it warp in some settings. There's warp travel, faster than light travel. The fact that they're calling it faster than light travel is far more sciencey than they've ever deigned to get within Magic the Gathering anyway. Mm-hmm. So these Drix can weft walk, which is where they open up a split in reality.
Yeah.
And
they access the substrate of reality.
And they open up another substrate at the place they want to be, and they walk through it, and that's how they're doing it. If you've ever watched Event Horizon, which is probably my favourite horror, maybe even favourite sci-fi film of all time, it's the Sam Neill explanation where he takes a piece of paper, he folds it in half, and punches the pencil through it.
The concept that everyone learns about how wormholes work.
Which is, so they create wormholes, which is a really fantastic way of doing, again, the hard magic system. This is a system of magic, it's not wibbly wobbly, this is what they do, but obviously it's science-based. So they are a species that has a lot of mythology around them. All the other races basically see them as being space mystics. Any legend of the Edge of Eternities comes from Drix legend and the idea of weft walking. And the way that Pinnacle utilises this, because the Drix aren't part of the Pinnacle alliance, but they have helped them develop things, is that they've given the Pinnacle's races, if I feel like I'm fumbling through this, is because we're all learning this as we go. Mm-hmm. They've given them the ability to create, is it Eternity Drives?
Eternity Drives, yeah.
And the Eternity Drive is a special machine within each spaceship, if you have a spaceship with an Eternity Drive, which allows you to open up these weft doorways. It doesn't make you propel you through them. No. It just allows you to open up those reality doorways. Yeah. And then a set of, is it columns? What do they call them?
I can't remember. Within the story, I've only seen one. It's like the Infinity thing. One of the best images of
Eternity Column, that's it.
It is.
So I'll read directly from the Planeswalker's Guide. How does faster than light travel work? Faster than light travel requires 3 components. A vessel equipped with an Eternity Drive, proximity to an Eternity Column, so that the column can transmit sufficient power to the ship and propel them into the weft, and a Pinnacle codebook, which is to correctly align your starting point and finishing point. So Pinnacle have gone, to propel yourself through this warp, we can't do what the Drix do, because no one really knows what the Drix do. So we're going to have a lot of power to basically get you there. Ships can't handle that much power. So they've got these physical columns that slingshot them through the doorway. If your ship can create these doorways and give you the coordinates to and from, that's what we'll do. Yeah. And these columns are free to use across the system. You don't have to be part of Pinnacle to use them, and also Pinnacle don't maintain them. They just kind of provide them because their Malamass is such.
They're kind of separate from any affiliation.
Yeah. So it's this really wild idea that we have this warp-capable species that have given everyone else kind of warp-adjacent.
Yeah.
But no one knows how they do it.
Yeah, it's very strange. I mean, we don't actually get a... Because even in the side stories, we see a Drix. Okay, I need to dilute that for you, darling. Don't.
Oh yeah, I basically just drunk raw rum there.
Yeah, no, darling, sweetie. In the side story where we follow Adrix, we don't really get much more of an explanation. It doesn't really say it. It explains what he's doing, but it doesn't really say how. And I think it's because they go, let's not try and explain something we don't know how to explain. It happens. They do it. Space wizards.
Yeah, space wizards.
Space wizards.
We just kind of give a quick blow through of some of the other species we can encounter. We have the Ilvoy bloom, which are our kind of blue jellyfish aquatic race.
Yeah, that use little fucking monitor drones to give their emotions and things, because they don't actually really have faces.
They're like the most removed from sort of like other humanoids in a way. There are other species that are kind of similar to them, but yeah, there are kind of like, we're aquatic water people.
They give me a little bit of. They remind me a little bit of the ones from The Arrival.
Yes.
And then they also remind that, and they also, but it's a cross between that and Independence Day.
A little bit of Independence Day. And they live on a water world, obviously.
Yes.
You have the Avendo strain Eumidians, which
Bugs.
are our insect race.
And they are the most widespread of any particular species, which, given the animal kingdom of Earth, as we always assume, that if there are going to be aliens out there, probably going to be bugs, because bugs have the most varied biological makeup, and also have things like hard carapaces. I mean, I don't know why I'm having to get like biological and sciencey about it, but it makes sense that bugs are in space.
And then we have, maybe very interesting, before we talk a little bit about the humans, because the humans are a bit interesting in this set as well. We have the Carvronic Federal Empire, shortened to the Carv.
We've got Carvu, sentient bipedal Carvu
with 2 arms.
2 arms.
So this is where we get the biggest sort of hint that the multiverse does exist in part in the Edge of Eternities, because it's clear that some sort of prehistoric, if we want to use terminology that we can kind of understand within this context, some prehistoric Carvu strain ended up in the Edge of Eternities and then evolved over billions of years to become these sentient bipedal Carvu folk.
Which still have a very different way of... like, they feel very alien, but they feel like relatable alien, of where, like, okay, they have different mannerisms, they have different ways of speech, they have different things that they hold in high regard and ethics and morals. Like, it's a really cool... Because our main story follows a human and a Carv. So we get a lot of interaction and seeing them in a lot of different situations that isn't just, oh, I'm Big Bruiser kind of thing. You actually get a lot more nuance.
They certainly don't make them like how you might have, like, say, Klingons or Wookiees, which are, you know, they're kind of seen as being a little bit primitive and a little bit sort of bad. The Carv in this setting, whilst they are the brutish race, they have just as much logic and sentience as any other race. It's just they have it in their kind of perception of what's going on. They don't like making decisions, for example. They follow sort of their instinct, but their instinct is very sort of calm. There's a line in one of the stories where when Carvu get surprised or scared, they actually, on the outside, look very calm, because they've
calm before the violence.
They've evolved to kind of like make sure that they don't go like berserker, which is for them would be sort of like frantic and sort of reckless. So when they get scared, all their systems kind of narrow in and zoom in. They also perceive things like smell and taste and senses in a very different way.
They're also a lot quicker. I think there's a point in the story where Sammy has a reaction time of like 120 milliseconds, whereas for the Carv it's 20 milliseconds reaction time, which is obviously 6 times faster. Which is kind of crazy.
Their planet is also... So we haven't spoken a lot about the planets, and I don't know if we can dig too deep into them.
I think there's only a couple that are really super worth talking about, and we'll probably talk about the others when we get to it in the story. Yeah,
the Carvu planet... Clavicon is split into 2 halves.
Clavicon that is, and the Clavicon before.
So the Clavicon before is in... So basically the way it works is that the Carv on Clavicon they're like a mining sort of society, and so they've dug for the minerals within their own planet.
What did they do, Andy? They dug too deep.
They dug too deep. Too
Andy.
greedily and too deep. And basically they corrupted their own planet structurally, which wouldn't have been a problem. They are the second closest celestial body to Cythera, and it wouldn't have been an issue if Cythera was still in supernova mode. Yeah. But because Cythera is now going into super void because of the fucking monoists, their planet is starting to break away and being sucked into the black hole.
Yeah, half of it is intact. You've got like a demisphere.
Yeah.
Or hemisphere.
Demisphere.
It is demisphere. Whereas the other side, it almost looks like the meteor from Final Fantasy
It's
VII.
being pulled
where
in.
The outside is structurally black, and it's kind of crazy to think about because it's still got such a mass that all of the blown up side of it keeps pulling back in, blowing up again because they've got rich explosive aura material within it. There's also like a bunch of caches, and it's essentially like Emeria, but if Emeria was an entire half of the planet. And it keeps exploding back out again, sucking back in, but obviously big bits of continent shift off, and then they put these anchors in the other side to essentially hold half of the planet together, while they try and do... What they said was... They dug so deep that they broke their planet, and damned their species, and the only way their species wasn't entirely damned was by continuing to dig while they've still got the fucking time. Like, they can't help themselves. They're the most dwarvish dwarves ever.
Yeah, they are kind of like space dwarves, aren't they? But I love the naming convention which they've used here, which is Clavicon before is the safe side, because that's what their society was before this thing happened. Whereas is the one that's going into the sun. So even they acknowledge, this is what I love about the setting of Edge of Eternities, and it's right in my fucking like pocket of interest, is I love sci-fi fantasy because often it deals with concepts of like entropy and like kind of our place within a wider universe much more than almost any other genre. Like I love, as I've said on this podcast many times, cosmic horror that deals with this kind of concept. So to have a species, regardless of how like barbaric and they're the dumb brutish ones, still having a sense of no, our situation is that our planet's dying. Our society is what was before. So we're just doing what was before, but we know realistically we're all going to die.
Yeah, they're very aware of the mistakes they've made. And there is, I think, because obviously things happen in millennia, spans of millennia, there is a lot more like, I want to say like cultural integrity, because it's like these things and these systems are in place because they've been in place and have worked against all of the odds, and in the face of great adversity. Obviously, we don't know the history of the Edge of Eternities very, very well, but obviously these species have survived the way they have for a reason. And so those systems being in place makes a lot more sense. And the fact that they're so... Because they're very aware that they've fucked their planet, but they're not willing to give up on it entirely, even though they know eventually they're going to have to abandon it. And that kind of idea, and it works for them because they're very... They care, and you can tell they're also pragmatic. It's like, the reality of the situation is what it is. We're going to make do with what we can,
Cavron is the name of the planet.
Is it Cavron?
Yeah, that's all right. We had an L. That's fine. A couple of other notable, aspects of this setting are the mechs. So we have mechans, and you basically have two forms of these mechans. You have drones and androids.
So you have the real people and
the real boy people. And the fake boy. So drones are how we would imagine that thing. They're artificial tools, essentially.
They do a job.
Yeah, they're AI to a point where they are basically servants. So they are the digging pods, the service droids, all that kind of thing.
They don't have sapience.
Yeah, androids, on the other hand, are fully recognised, and I love this aspect. I love it when sci-fi settings have this, because there's something very boring about people being like, you're not a real person, you're just a robot. I find that attitude in sci-fi so boring.
Mental. Like, our brain is just a sparkly, energy, gelatinous computer.
Because you would think that in a sci-fi setting where people understand the idea of like science to such a degree, that having a artificial brain but that has just as much agency as a real brain, it wouldn't actually be an issue. It's like Gene Roddenberry's vision for Star Trek was like that things like disability or even down to things that don't matter, like being bald, for example, wouldn't ever be an issue. Like his vision of Star Trek was that you could technically have characters that are in, say, wheelchair users or that have, like, amputee or whatever, and they wouldn't necessarily try and fix those things as a baseline because it shouldn't matter in general. It's like, you can if you want, but also, who cares?
Yeah.
So the fact that androids, who are these artificial people, it's like, okay, they're artificial, but, like, they're just as much a person as I am. Yeah. I love that. And so you have androids and drones. We've yet to see much...
We get one in the side story, and so I think it's called Bring You Much Happiness or something you'll get to, which is quite cute. Their naming conventions are really strange. And I like that they say there are multiple ways to get to androids. There are androids that might develop naturally over time. There might be people that put their brains into other...
Yes, you do have that aspect,
system. Yeah. And that's, I think, where that line then gets muddied, is because sometimes that person and that robot can have been a person before. So at that point, it's like, who's to say there is any difference?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm interested to see what's going on. Do we think the Medicant core?
So I would believe. So the way I think of it is that yes, but not from the obviously not from the Cytheran system.
So for those of you that are maybe a little bit burnt out on all the different factions they brought in Magic sets over the past few years. The Medicant were seen in Ether Drift as one of the racing teams, and they were the where the fuck are these robots from robot team, which all looked a little bit like Claptrap.
Yeah, and it was very much like, oh, okay, we're going to see them in Edge of Eternities, because you look at Edge of Eternities, you look at the Medicants, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah,
this is
absolutely from the same plane, same universe, whatever you want to call it. I just think the good thing about this setting is that even though we're seeing one system and a really important event that's happening there, I hope beyond hope that we will come back to the Edge of Eternities, and we'll probably come back, and the thing they'll use to bring us back will be like, remember the Medicants?
I honestly think
now they've got home.
They will do like how they're trying to wrangle in our sort of product fatigue with a little bit of structure now by going, we're going to have this many universes beyond sets and this many in-universe sets. I wouldn't be surprised if going forward they'll go with the 3 universes within sets, or however they want to do. We'll do 2 multiverse sets and 1 Edge of Eternities set.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd be cool.
I would quite like for us to hear more about the Fomori, but then them also still be stuck out here in the Edge, so we only really come back to them later. So, okay, cool. That's all of the different races and
that's
stuff.
The factions.
Shall we get into some what the fuck do you mean? Lore. The Eldrazi Fomori War.
Yeah, there's a line that drops in about the Eldrazi Fomori War. They didn't expand on it in
and Tezzeret specifically goes, Memnon, stop. Find out everything you fucking can about this Eldrazi Fomori war right now.
Yeah, Memnon is his Ilvoy pilot, right?
Who is, because of their affiliation with Tezzeret, has been ostracized.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I haven't read that bit.
Turns out being with the Metal Man is not good for
they call him the Metal Man, which I find weird. In the
I like the fact there's I don't know if you've got to that particular episode, but at the end of one of the episodes, it just goes, it's like, also, who is this Metal Man? And Sammy, because it is like a big thing, just goes, he's a wizard.
I think I've seen that.
And it's like, because obviously magic out there isn't that big a thing.
Yeah. Having individual moments of you being a magic user is actually very rare.
So the Drix we didn't mention are kind of our, as you say, the Jedi, and they know about the bad guys. They know about these Eldrazi. There was an Eldrazi Fomori war that we are led to believe that the Fomori essentially, quote unquote, won, because the Eldrazi, as much as there are vestiges of the Eldrazi still within the Edge of Eternities, and we see bits and pieces of them, they still exist, drawn by mana, which is why not being very mana rich is really good for the Edge of Eternities, because it doesn't attract all these cosmic beings that want to fucking nom nom on your mana lines, you know? So there must have been a big climactic battle. The Drix are still very aware of this. They go essentially around and bounty hunt like the last remnants of the Eldrazi, or try and keep them in place, or if there's any strange things. So in the side story, there's like a little artifact that essentially allows any person to weft walk.
Oh, that's
essentially turns them. It's kind of like almost like Ether Sparky, almost in a way of where it's allowing someone to walk the blind eternities, but obviously we're in the edge of eternity, so it's interesting. I would like to see the metaphysics of the difference between a planeswalker planeswalking between planes within the blind eternities, and then someone being able to weft walk outside in the edge of eternities.
Well, what it suggests to me, and this is where we start getting to the implications of why have they decided to do these 2 different settings, is that there is some physical matter that makes the blind eternities like a physical plasma that you can move through with planeswalking that you can't do in the weft, and vice versa.
Because the way they describe the weft, it doesn't look. It seems again like it's a substrate of reality. It's almost like you get into the webbing around reality. You're not finding a tunnel through. You're going almost around and back in again. So we know that the Fomori don't exist or haven't been seen for a really long time. And we know, obviously, the Eldrazi were beaten back to the point of where there's only like a little bit of lingering influence. And as far as most people are aware, they sit within the Chaos Wall. So the Fomori, for all the mentioning, seem to only appear in one, or could only appear in one place, and that's beyond the Worm Wall.
Yes, which we haven't spoken a lot about. No. It's an asteroid belt.
Like an asteroid belt, but weird shit happens within it.
There are these giant worms, hence why there's worm called the Worm Wall, and it's these giant creatures that basically feed off the energies within the asteroid field, and they're these giant ancients, essentially.
And all of our main story cast and side stories all have some kind of interaction with it. The Carve side story interacts with it. The Ilvoy one, I believe, also interacts with it, and you basically each person who interacts with the wormhole, weird shit happens. Either it's kind of like Event Horizon. Either they go a little bit crazy, they hear voices, they'll face damage to their crafts. Like mechans will forget the things that they interacted with, but they definitely interacted with things in it. So there's this whole kind of like, well, who is beyond? Have the Fomori maybe like gone into hibernation? They're hiding beyond the worm wall. There is also the Garden of Aperon, which is like a giant nebula of funky wonky stuff that you can't go into it. The reason why most people don't go to the wormhole is because you've got to go through the garden to get there, and nothing survives going through the garden. It's like the Bermuda Triangle of space.
Well, it's a little bit, I know I mentioned it earlier, but it very much is like the warp in 40k, where it's like, it's almost like its own hellish reality within the reality of the space.
And it's moving.
Yeah.
It's moving independent of the gravitational pull of Sathira. So I imagine, I'm on, so for full disclosure, I'm on episode 10 out of the 11 stories. We still haven't touched on that side of things, and I'm pretty sure that's where the finale and the climax is that's going to be where we get all of our answers. You know, when I say all of our answers, we're going to get another cliffhanger and be like, hey, can't wait to see you back here in 5 years' time.
We're off to Lorwyn again. Like, fucking no!
Guess what the Aurora is? It came from the Blind Eternity. Okay, sure, that's the link, right? So I'm sure we're going to get into it more, but there isn't, so it's not just... It's space, it's science, there's not very much magic, because even within the systems that millennia of years in technological development, we get to some really fucking cool sci-fi physics shit, but we'll talk about that when we get into the stories because it'll have better context. But there is also weird mumbo-jumbo stuff. You've got the Chaos Wall. We don't really understand how the Eldrazi exist within. I imagine for them, the Eldrazi are probing out from their house and looking out into the wilds and going, hey, is there anything out there in that field? You know, and picking up on it and numbing it. We don't know what's happened to the Fomori. We obviously know that at some point they entered into our multiverse on big spaceships, which means they probably clearly were traveling around in space faring.
Yeah.
Why they disappeared, how they disappeared, if it was deliberate, if they were annihilated.
Well, where they came from. Are they a multiverse native?
Yeah,
or
did they leave? Because obviously they were on Ear. But did they come from Ear back out into the edge and then come back again?
Yeah.
Like, who knows? And then also we've still got the garden that is some either sentient or alive in some fashion. And then we also know from one of the side stories, because we're not going to talk about it in the main story, there is a giant... mind-bending titan in the inside of the research center at the core of Ulthros. So Ulthros' core is like a really super compact, it's like a gas planet, but it has like a tiny, I say tiny, I think comparative to the size of the planet, there's only a tiny little core. There's this, the Ilvoy have built both into the core and out of the core to essentially make it look bigger.
Is Ulthros the Ilvoy planet?
Yeah, the one that's all cloudy, swirling. But someone goes in there to try and research for something, and they end up coming across. It's similar to an episode of Love, Death Plus Robots, of where the soldiers go into that cave, and then they find the eldritch monstrosity trained up that wants to go free me. It's essentially that scene of where the person looking goes, I don't care if they find me or what, and they kill me, as long as I can stay here in front of this giant thing that's mind bending me. And I guess the presumption at that point is Eldrazi Titan.
I would be a little... So, as much as the blind... Fuck! I've done it again. As much as Edge of Eternities is dealing with this idea that it's kind of like a sort of shattered mirror version of the multiverse, which it has aspects of, but isn't exactly the same. As much as I understand they have to do their own thing, if it wasn't an Eldrazi Titan and they did something else, I'd be very annoyed because there has to be some consistency.
I think... So, the one thing I haven't mentioned that I think is the greatest aspect of this story in this setting is that one thing that's difficult with Magic is you're working with a bunch of individual plane systems, and it's no secret that I love getting into the nitty-gritty of the metaphysics of the multiverse and the metaphysics of this system and this world that we live in. And the Edge of Eternities is taking a step back and having actual perspective on everything, and we can maybe get some answers even all those years back about the Eldrazi being fingers in the pond, you know, part of the bigger hand, and who's the hand. Maybe now we're going to see what the hand is. Maybe we're actually going to see that come to full fruition. We actually get to see the without instead of from within.
Do you want to know what they've already done that I think could fit in this space? I'm not saying it's good or bad. Ulalek.
Is that? I mean, I know they specifically said it's not canon.
It's not canon until they release the Edge of Eternities, and then going, tricked you.
Do we happen to see a 3-form Titan, and that's actually Emrakul, Ulamog, and Kozilek all as one, and it's only because when it goes into the Blind Eternities, it happens to get spliced and separated. but it itself is just one
entity.
Again, one entity, and then it would make sense that then at one point it crosses its fingers to make Ulalek instead of. Well, I did an action there that you don't want to know. That was disgusting.
There was a twisting motion involved.
Twisting motion. So imagine like crossing your fingers instead of having those two fingers separate. That's for the difference. So I mean, I hope so, because there's two big aspects that they're going for. We knew we were potentially going to get some Fomori answers, and I think they're really dangling this Fomori thing because the more we hear about them, the more powerful they seem to be. Like the big MacGuffin of the story, in my opinion, appears to be a Fomori artifact, and it has some crazy powers and implications. So the fact that they're able to do that, they're able to go in, they're able to surround Chimil, the sun, they're able to do crazy stuff with that, and that's just with one ship, And then obviously Coin Emperor has been present in other planes as well. The fact that we're only getting a little hint of there, but they also then drift in this Eldrazi, and then it's the Fomori versus the Eldrazi. It's like they're ticking off two boxes at the same time, but combining them together into something.
Yeah, well, we haven't seen the Eldrazi in any good faith since Shadows over Innistrad and Eldritch Moon.
That's a good lie. I think Emrakul imprisoning her in the moon was the last good thing they did.
And also, the Eldritch horror aspect of Shadows over Innistrad was more like, what's our Eldritch cosmic horror thing? It's the Eldrazi. It wasn't really an Eldrazi storyline. It wasn't an Innistrad storyline using Emrakul as the kind of influence, right?
I just think it's really funny that they did a Lovecraftian kind of horror theme, but instead of being any of the big old krakens that we know that actually live down here, actually legitimate cosmic space.
It's cosmic horror.
It fulfilled itself, so I think that story had a lot of chops.
I'm going to say this is a complete swing in from the left now that we're talking about Innistrad rather than Edge of Eternities. I'm going to say that Shadows and Eldritch Moon is actually a far more interesting horror setting than the original Innistrad set.
100%.
Oh, that's controversial, I know.
I mean, the original Innistrad, now we think about it, was just a Duskmourn, but
it's gothic horror, which is fine.
It was a hat set, but it was a hat set done properly.
Mm-hmm.
It had a bit more integrity.
So I guess we've been talking about this now for like almost an hour. And there's so much to digest. And this is less of a, we have all the answers and we're imparting it to you because we're Vorthoses and other people don't have the time for this shit. I actually think this podcast, as this podcast has evolved with the fandom in general, is that most Vorthoses, or people who like the story, are as clued up as the entrenched Vorthoses, because this side of Magic, ironically, has become just as important, even though we're in a world where fucking universes beyond exists and Magic stories being minimised in a way.
And it's not like nuance that's hidden on page 270 of a novel. It's that there's
it's all there.
Because it's a smaller amount to digest, it's easier for the average person to digest it.
So I suppose as we're basically just thinking out loud and recording it, which I'm kind of happy for us to be that space. I mean, Jay and Ellie's on the Vorthos cast. We can't all be Lore Masters for Wizards of the Coast. How do you feel being in this world where we have a true blue sci-fi magic setting that isn't a plane? Do you like it?
I think it's surprising how much it feels like it works. I think they've been slow dripping this for a long time to kind of like test the waters, because it's a long way from Dominaria or Alara or somewhere that's like
sci-fi has existed in Magic previously. It's just not existed like this.
It's not existed in a pure form, and it's kind of interesting now we've gone to a pure form, and they're even saying that and they can see it's going to be that we're playing a set with colours and everything, even though we're not actually really tapping into mana because there isn't mana within this setting, which kind of I think. I'll look at it and be like, why is this card too... I mean, I know why it's green, but I'm not able to tap... Like, my lands need to make more sense to me, I think,
Yeah, I wonder.
So certain aspects of it, I feel like I'm going to have to blinker my... if I'm being really, actually about it. But considering the integrity... And this is where integrity of story can really carry a set. Without seeing very many previews... This side of it, the world building, the characterization, and the general structure and metaphysics of the plane. Let's see, I've only got one episode left to go that comes out on Monday. Let's hope that it doesn't drop the ball, and actually manage to fulfill and answer some questions and make it a really nice, well finished story. If so, as a concept, love it. I don't. The execution from the set might be hit or miss. Who knows? Station might not be a very good mechanic. I don't really care, but. To make something that is literally removed from Magic as the Magic multiverse, but then to still feel like it's complementing, informing, and developing the Magic multiverse is no small feat, and I think it's doing it very well.
Yeah, I'm a big sci-fi nerd. I always have been, and actually, when I look back at all the kind of little fandoms that I've dipped in and out of, even since I was a child, so much of it has been sci-fi fantasy. And, like, I'm not going to go over all of them now. I've mentioned almost all of them in the 150-odd episodes that we've done on this podcast. But there's been, like, you know, so much influence where I like the idea of a celestial, magic-y setting. And I am so not against the idea of being in space. It was just how they were going to do it for magic. And I've obviously been so against and vocally against Universes Beyond. Even when I've been softer on it, I've still been on like the kind of far end of not being into it. And it just proves again that Magic and the world building team, the narrative team, can do these things within Magic without necessarily having to slap a fucking Star Trek logo on the set symbol.
So do you think that the only reason this works so well, because we've kind of not talked about it, but the one thing we really wanted when we said there's only going to be one proper Magic set left for the rest of the year is that, well, they better put all of their bloody efforts into it. Do you reckon the only reason they were able to do such a great job on this is because they didn't have to dilute their time by creating a Final Fantasy story or a Spider-Man story or an Last Airbender story, because all of these things already exist? So the only story they had to worry about building for a fair while was this. And it might even be deliberate. They went, hey, we need to put so much effort into this. Can we take a bit of time off, do a couple of Universes Beyond sets to give us time to really deliver this one? And if so, is it worth it?
That's a very interesting point. I wonder, if we go back to 2012 and we look at the amount of different settings we got then, where we still had, so we had 3 sets per setting.
Yes.
So if block sets. So you had Theros block set and Tarkir block set. As much as they obviously had to design 900 cards instead of 300 cards, as much as they had to kind of stretch story, even though the story, you know, there was like 5 articles.
I mean, no, you're right. They stretched. It wasn't always.
It wasn't always
3
tight.
Full stories. It was always a little bit elongated.
The actual amount of different settings we had and the amount of different lore we had dropped was maybe more comparable to what we're getting with this year, with only having, say, 1 or 2 or 3 different Magic settings. And I think it's the reason we feel shortchanged or feel a bit like, fatigued, is literally because of the corporate structure of selling.
The release structure, spoiler season, leaks, you know,
whereas
all of that.
Actually, it was exhausting when we still had 4 standard sets a year or whatever it was, and each one of them was a different setting, and we had to dip in and out of all these different things. And yeah, we had loads more Magic story. Yeah, we had loads of different settings. But actually, we didn't dive too deep into any of them because we didn't get a chance. And there was so much of it that you were kind of breaknecking between cars, horror, like cutesy animals, fucking hell. Oh, God, I don't want to praise any sort of aspect of this structure as it is. All I will say is that yes, if you give the narrative team 2 or 3 points to head towards rather than 5 or 6 or 7 points to head towards, they're probably going to put more into that work. I don't know.
I agree.
All I can say is that of everything we've had this year, from Dragonstorm and Edge of Eternities, that they seem to have put their whole arse into it. And I wish they were 2 set blocks. I still think that's the sweet spot.
Yeah, I agree.
I just really wish. Do you know what I wish? Is that I didn't have to fucking sit at a table and look at Spider-Man cards the entire fucking time.
I know, I get you. I think it's difficult, right? Because I like everything at Final Fantasy, and I mean, obviously we're not going to do a flavor picks episode for it. We've moved beyond that now, but there was a lot of integrity in that set. I think that mostly comes with the fact that Final Fantasy has a lot of integrity, and they had to do a good job of it because it's such a precious IP to be able to take over and collaborate with. Let's see if that works similarly for Spider-Man. I think it might be slightly less. What's the word I'm looking for?
Coherent?
Not coherent. Faithful. You know, whereas the Final Fantasy set felt like a faithful Final Fantasy recreation. I don't know if we get to the end of the year and we've had Spider-Man and Last Airbender and they both felt a little bit meh because we pushed past Edge of Eternities so quickly. Because there is only a very small gap between Edge of Eternities and Spider-Man. I think it's like a month, maybe even a month and a half or something before we get another set afterwards immediately. So I want to sit in this space for a fair while. You know, joke notwithstanding. I don't
want to turn the conversation completely to Universes Beyond. So I'm going to open it up to the hat sets as well. Do you think that that people, and by people I mean sort of like Hasbro and maybe some of like the large corporate entities that control the direction of like a lot of the sort of style of Magic, and like, okay, you have to pump out all these sets or whatever. I'm not against trying things. You have to try things in an artistic and corporate endeavor, otherwise you never grow and you never tap into new things that might surprise you that people liked it and whatever. But if we take space, people always complained about like, oh, Magic can't have guns or Magic can't have spaceships or whatever else, this, that, and the other. And actually the reaction to Edge of Eternities is, no, this works.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like a hat set, even though it's probably one of the hattiest
Probably.
sets.
I mean, there's literal fucking the Federation in it. Like, Pinnacle is the Federation. But if you compare that to Ether Drift, which still had very, as we said in our, like, exploration of it, there was a lot of, like, tropes in there that were, like, sincere. This is a trope of, like, the kind of wacky races, speed racer genre, and that is a genre in its own right. It just fell a bit flat. Is there because what people want out of this game is actually narrower than they would like, and so there is only a finite amount of different types of sets you can do, so you shouldn't necessarily try everything?
Well, I'm of the opinion that a set like this feels like something that Magic can get away with that other franchises might not be able to. And I look at certain things like, I wouldn't want another high fantasy knights and dragons set. Like, I actually found Eldraine, like, the wild side of it was much more interesting to me than the court side of it.
Which is a shame, because the court side of it had a really nice idea.
It was great. I mean, I like it in theory, it's just I don't have a lot of affinity with, like, I'm not a big fan of, like, I don't mind things like A Knight's Tale, you know, or, what was the one I said earlier?
Princess Bride.
Princess Bride, that kind of thing. Like, that doesn't. I don't have a huge amount of affinity for that. Just classic fantasy. I find it to be a little bit done. And I know that obviously sci-fi is also like the second most, you know, widespread fiction, you know, outside of fantasy. But there's something about this that makes me feel like it's got legs and it's got more to get into, even though it is beyond the universe of the multiverse. It is a universe is beyond, and that is a really interesting thing for me, because you're doing something that's very unmagic, but it feels even more magic and something I want to engage with even more than if we just did, hey, let's do another Dominaria set.
Yeah, it's interesting. There are definitely some, like, if we take the original Eldraine, where they did Arthurian Legend versus Germanic Fairy Tale, the Arthurian Legend fell flat, because as much as it is maybe visually the kind of basis for a lot of high fantasy, i.e. knights, castles, kings, crusades, like all that kind of thing, the actual, when you dig into it, as a student of a lot of British Isles fantasy, in my adult life, I'm obsessed with this kind of shit. I've got a fucking Green Man tattoo, like that kind of thing, right? The magic in those stories is actually far more subtle and soft. So when you try and dig into it for a bit of substance, you actually find that there's very little to pull on which most people can relate to outside of just, I'm wearing armour, I'm on a horse. Whereas things that are maybe a bit more explicit or universal, or, as I say, maybe Magic just does have a narrower window, and that's fine. You just need to really capitalise on it rather than just churning through, keep going.
It's funny you say that, because so the space things, you know, do seem far more fantastical because the physics of them are so much more impossible from a humanistic point of view. So it's actually like it's way easier to understand like crazy physics than it is to understand magic, because magic isn't something that we actually have in our day-to-day, whereas science is. So it can feel way more ridiculous to do all of these space things, but it's also way more relatable, so it feels a bit more tangible. Whereas something that's just generic, magic, wavy, handy, do like Scarlet Witch, for example. Love them as a character, but it's just chaos magic. I'm like, cool, great, my eyes are glazing
Definitely
over.
within the MCU, for sure, yeah.
Like, I'm literally reading the Sean Maguire What If Spider-Man and Wanda Maximoff were brother and sister. And it's very much like this grounded superhero that I understand. You know, I know if you start getting into the true lore of Spider-Man, he also like manipulates physics around him to make himself sticky rather than just being sticky. But it's much easier for me to relate to him as a character and how his mechanics work compared to Wanda, even though they go to a great length to try and explain it. It's still just kind of wibbly wobbly, magicy stuff.
It's actually, for a set that I think a lot of people just kind of went, ugh, this is kind of a throwaway Magic set, although they are going back to it next year. The Quandrix school in Strixhaven, which is the maths magic.
Strixhaven Secrets.
They literally capitalise, and I've just pulled it up just because I wanted to remember the quote as it actually is. It's the Arthur C. Clarke quote, or at least it's the thing that's attributed to him, which is the any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
That's what I tried to say earlier, but wasn't smart
Yeah,
enough.
sure. Well, you know, I have Google on my side. They have tapped into these, you know, aesthetics before, and I just think it's great that they're able to go full hog.
Yeah,
and you can tell
it's
there's
the
passion. There's
Asgardians
so much
thing.
passion.
I look at the Estelian, I'm like, you're just Asgardians, like, you know. And I want to.
Space Angels is amazing.
I'm excited to. It does have that heavy metal, the film heavy metal.
Yeah, I fucking love heavy metal.
Yeah.
Oh, in all its 80s misogynistic glory.
Yeah, of course. But I mean, could you imagine if they did like special treatments that were in the same way that we got Transformers? You could have like heavy metal ones. You know, I think that'd be quite cool. But it gets me excited for the set.
I love heavy metal
because I hope that they can translate a lot of what I've seen, but in a way that I don't want a card that's just lift off. You know.
Well, that's what they need to avoid.
Unless they do a split card where it's lift off touchdown, and I'm like, you know what? I'm like. That's okay.
Lift off, crash landing.
Well, you do it as an aftermath card. Lift off to touchdown.
That's quite cool.
That's quite cool, right? Hire me, wizards. Hire me.
All right. I think
That's it. That's good.
That's it. That's the setting. Please read the Planeswalker's Guide. It is incredible.
Yeah.
Please read the stories or listen to them. No shade on the Magic Story podcast. They've done an excellent job. They did performed a service. For this time round, the stories they've hired in a voice actor whose name escapes me, but when we do the story episodes, I will have it to hand. They've absolutely smashed it out of the park.
Yeah, the side stories are equally good. They basically just touch on all the different races. The main story is Seth Dickinson, who is already a very prolific sci-fi writer. And does an absolutely stellar job. So we'll be getting into that in the next episode. It turns out space is so big it needs to be split into 2 episodes. Who knew?
Yeah, we haven't done this for a while.
No, I'm worried because there is a lot of... I think we can condense the story down, but
when I do my story breakdown, I'm not going to lie to you, it might just literally be each episode has like it follows these guys, they go and do this. Next episode, and
then we can pick apart the little...
Please read the stories before you listen to our story breakdown.
They're super dense. There's lots of things in it that I want to talk about, but it's going to be... It's a very wide scope story. I think it's very simple, actually. It's just MacGuffin, go get thing, go do thing. But...
Whenever I start... Because obviously we have both done now a healthy amount of our story breakdowns on the story episodes, which I'm glad of, because I love it when you do it as well. I remember when I did the latest Innistrad sets, the Midnight Hunt Crimson Vow sets, and I remember going, actually, I can pretty much beat for beat this in like 10-15 minutes because it is a relatively simple story. And now I'm just like, I'm doing the blurb on the back of the novel, and then you're going to have to read the novel.
I think once you get it down, once you get down to the basic principles, it's not much more complicated than your average sci-fi story. It's just there's lots of little bit because it's a whole new system for this universe to have to deal with. So it has to kind of explain everything, but it also doesn't baby you. It goes, I'm just going to chuck all these terms at you, and your brain just goes, I don't understand any of this. That makes it sciencey, and I like it, you know? And then you can go back in and type into your Google and find out what the words mean and be like, oh, okay, right, cool, fair enough. But like, it's the right delivery to make you to get you in. It doesn't fit. The first episode might push you away a little bit. Get to episode 2 and you'll be sucked in, I promise.
Yeah. All right. No final thoughts.
No. Bugger off. Enjoy your weekend. This probably doesn't come out ahead of the weekend, right?
I'll have it edited and done by tomorrow.
Lovely. Okay, good. Enjoy your weekend, folks.
This has been Magic the Flavouring. Thank you so much for listening.
We'll see you soon.